welcome to our podcast. I'm Raikarin Moreno.
And I'm Carla Rico, and today we're diving into a key concept in our contemporary culture, postmodernism.
When we talk about postmodernism, we're talking about a big movement that takes shape mainly in the second half of the 20th century, after the end of World War II.
Exactly. Postmodernism is so important because it appears after historical events such as the Cold War and the Vietnam War. It also emerges between social movements like the civil rights, feminism, the growth of mass consumer culture, and later on the rise of television, advertising, and digital technologies.
After all these huge historical and social changes, many people just stop believing the modern idea that there is only one right version of reality. Instead, they start to think that reality is not just something stable that we discover, but something we socially construct through language, images, and narratives.
And that's the background we want to keep in mind today. A world where absolute truths don't exist. Identity is unstable, and reality is just a construct of words and images. In literature, this postmodern shift completely changed the way writers tell stories. Instead of following a simple linear plot with a clear moral, many authors experiment with fragmented structures, reliable narrators, and open endings. They question what reality is, and they draw attention to the fact that what we're reading is a construction.
So, postmodern literature doesn't just tell what happens, it also makes us think about how stories create meaning and how fragile that meaning can be. Characters often feel divided, confused, or unstable, and the texts themselves refuse to give us one final truth.
With that in mind, today we want to look at how those postmodern ideas appear in two different works that surprisingly speak to each other in powerful ways. City of Glass by Paul Auster and Rabbit Hole by David Lindsay-Abaire.
Today, our guiding question is how the City of Glass and Rabbit Hole each show a world where reality and identity are unstable, and how does that instability connect to grief, trauma, and the way characters try to survive.
We're going to start with City of Glass and see how Auster uses the detective genre to question reality and identity. And then we'll move on the rabbit hole, to see how those postmodern concerns appear in a more realistic and emotional setting.
So let's talk about City of Glass. City of Glass is a postmodern detective novella from 1985. It follows Daniel Quinn, a writer who gets these mysterious phone calls from someone asking for a private detective named Paul Auster. Instead of just hanging up, he pretends to be the detective and takes the case.
But it doesn't take long to realize this isn't a normal detective story, because the investigation doesn't lead to a clear solution. Instead, the case just pulls Quinn into pure uncertainty.
Yes, we can see how this novel takes a genre that usually depends on logic, clues, and closure and just breaks that pattern. Quinn is not the detective who solves everything and restores everything. He's just confused, isolated, and almost swallowed by the case.
I think Quinn's obsession with the case feels like more than just detective work. If we take it from a psychoanalytic point of view, it feels like a compulsive search for meaning. As we can see how he's trying to fill some inner emptiness through the investigation. It's like the more he follows the clues, the more he loses his own identity.
And now that you mention identity, I also like the way the novel plays with it. Quinn writes detective stories under the pseudonym of William Wilson, whose fictional detective is Matt's work. Then Quinn starts to take the identity of Paul Auster, which is also strange because that's also the author's name.
On top of that, there is also another character named Paul Auster in the story. which makes the whole thing even more confusing. It's like names and words don't seem to give us a stable truth anymore.
It's because language doesn't reflect reality like a mirror. It actually shapes reality and it can also make it feel unstable.
Yes, so if language and reality are unstable, then identity becomes unstable too.
And that helps explain why Queen feels so fragmented. He's not a solid and unified soul. He's shaped by the temporary roles, names, and language he uses.
I believe we can also see this instability in the other characters. For example, Peter Stephen Sr. is obsessed with language and control, while Peter Stephen Jr. is deeply damaged by what his father did to him. And Regina Stephen also adds to the sense that this family is fractured.
Even New York is not just a setting because it becomes part of that instability. So the novel is not only about solving a mystery, it's about showing a world where both reality and the self are socially constructed, suggesting that the story doesn't have a clear truth waiting at the end.
On the other hand, Rabbit Hole is a contemporary play from the 2000s about Becca and Howie, a couple trying to live with the accidental death of their young son, Danny, through everyday conversations and conflicts at home.
But it's not just a sad story about losing a child. Instead, it shows how the same trauma can affect two people in very different ways.
Yes, from a psychoanalytic point of view, Becca and Howie react with opposite defense mechanisms. Becca tries to erase the pain. She wants to clear all Danny's things, sell the house, and move away from everything that reminds her of him.
And Howie does the opposite. He tries to cling to the past. He keeps Danny's room the same, he watches his videos over and over again, and he just tries to hold on to the child through his memory.
That conflict is what makes the play so heartbreaking. For Becca to survive, she needs to forget. In other words, empty the space. For Howie to survive, he needs to remember. Or in other words, fill the space. Even so, they love each other. Their grief pulls them in different directions.
Right, so Becca and Howie are no longer just the perfect couple or the perfect family. Their identities are fragmented by grief, and each one of them starts to become a different version of themselves depending on how they handle the trauma.
Yes, so this place also suggests that identity is not fixed. It changes with trauma, memory, and the stories people tell themselves to survive.
And that makes reality feel unstable too, because what they thought their life was going to be now is gone. So the play shows a reality that can be fully displayed or fully controlled.
It's like there is no one stable story that explains why this accident happened. For me, this play questions what we call meta-narrative. Meta-narrative are those grand cultural belief systems that promise order and security.
Yeah, in this case, for Becca and Howie, the meta-narrative that collapsed is meritocracy and the American dream.
Yes, they follow all the rules, achieve financial success, and build the ideal family, but in reality, that didn't protect them from tragedy.
That's right, they had everything under control, but when Danny died, that control was broken. And for me, one of the worst parts is that Danny's death doesn't carry a heroic weight or serve as a moral lesson. The accident was just bad luck. No one could have done anything about it.
Yes, the play shows that there is no higher order, no reason, and no destiny. The universe is governed by pure chaos and contingency. In the 19th century, the story would have ended with a couple embracing and finding God or something like that. But modernism, it ends with Becca and Howie sitting in the garden, planning a barbecue they don't want to attend, accepting that the pain isn't going to go away.
Yeah, they will simply have to learn to live without pain. And I also think the title matters a lot because Jason, the boy who caused the accident, talks about parallel universe in comic books, which makes the rabbit hole thing feel like a way of imagining other possibilities. I think this kinda implies that life is not one fits path.
Yes, it suggests that there are possibilities, alternative, and version of the self that never fully settle into one truth. So in the end, Rabbit Hole refuses closure. It shows grief as a part of the identity of each character as something messy, unfinished, and impossible to fully explain.
In conclusion, City of Glass and Rabbit Hole show a world where our identities are not fixed, and reality is just a fragile construction that can collapse at any moment.
The big difference is how the characters try to survive this collapse. In City of Glass, Quinn refuses to face his grief after losing his entire family, and this leads him to completely dissolve his identity.
On the other hand, in Rabbit Hole, even if grief fractures the couple and language fails to express the trauma, at the end, Becca and Howie learn to accept that instability. They don't find a miracle cure, but it's like they accept to live with the fragments.
So even if they don't solve anything or don't have a clear end, both texts help us understand how people live through uncertainty and loss.
Yes, in the end, both texts remind us that we live in a world where meaning is fragile, identity changes, and people have to keep going without having all the answers.
So I think that's all for today.
Yes, it is. Thank you for listening to our podcast.
Bye bye bye!